So let's talk about grantor versus non-grantor trusts. This is something that many people in my community still ask me, and it's, a question that's rightfully so floating around out there because people are talking about what's the best way to make a trust secure from liability. And this idea of whether to be the grantor or not is an important point of contention. So just as a review of the basics for people who are unfamiliar, a trust to be lawful and legal needs to have three parties. You need to have a grantor or a settlor, which is the entity or person that grants the initial assets to start the trust. Then there needs to be a trustee, and then the trustee looks after the assets on behalf of the beneficiary. So each of these roles can have multiple people in them, but if we look at just a basic, the basic minimum of one person starting a trust, this is what I want to talk about, because when it comes to this idea of non-grantor, part of why, particularly in the private trust world, there are certain private trusts that are floating around out there that say they're non-grantor for the purposes of protecting the corpus of assets from liability. So keeping the trustee separate from liability involves having some other entity or other person, like your neighbor or a friend or whoever it may be. You can put them as the grantor, and so that way that shifts liability to them theoretically, and then the trustee can just look after the assets and they're not worried about any liability. So if someone sues them, oh well, that person or entity over there, they were the grantor. Now the reason that a lot of people and even lawyers and agents say that you need to do this is typically something called the control test, otherwise known as the alter ego test, where if you have a trust or a business entity of any kind, you don't want that entity to be operating as an alter ego of your person. So that means that, if you have your personal name, your straw man, and you're doing business, and then you want to be evasive, now you might create some kind of shell company over here, run the business through the shell company, and now that shell over here off of there is acting as an alter ego of your person. And then, if you get sued, now courts can go see that's a shell, and they did some trickery machinations to create this other entity over here, and now that entity can be pierced because in court it could theoretically be proven that that's operating as alter ego of the person. So that's why a lot of these, trust gurus and people out there recommend doing that. Now, with the bulletproof trust that we use here, if you want to learn more about that, you can join our community. We actually recommend being both the grantor and the trustee if you're one person. And if you have multiple people, then you can choose any one of those people to be the grantor, because the grantor really has no power when it comes to the ongoing operations of a trust. So that's just sort of a role that has to be there in order to initialize a trust and make it valid, but it's not one that has any sort of power whatsoever in an ongoing capacity. But the fear that many people have is not whether that role has power, but it's whether that role will transfer liability to the actual trust corpus if one person holds both those roles. So that's the fear that many people have. They say, well, if I was both the grantor and the trustee, now somehow that will compromise the trust in some way. But part of the way with the way the bulletproof trust is written is such that there's many clauses that all work together in a beautiful, elegant fashion, such that the trustee has power irrevocably over the trust. And that ultimately means the terms cannot be revoked by anyone. So no judge can revoke the terms, no lawsuit can pierce this trust and revoke the terms, no other outside entity or attacker can do anything to this trust because the terms are irrevocable. The only one who has power is the trustee or board of trustees. So that's the first thing. Fundamentally, it doesn't really matter who the grantor is because the trustee is the one that has all the power. But there's a last point, that I'm going to make here that is very, very important to really consider, because many of you watching this will be kind of debating, you're probably doing your research and looking at different trusts, and you might be wondering, should I do one of these non-grantor trusts because it's safer? But ultimately, there's two last things I'll say. One is, part of why in this trust we're both the grantor and trustee is we want to openly admit in this document that we are granting our souls to Jesus Christ, that we are granting our souls under God's protection. And so we're not trying to be evasive. We don't need our neighbor to do that for us. We need to do it ourselves. And so that's why we can put ourselves, if we're just one person and we're trying to create a trust, which is always the way we recommend starting. Instead of, it's just kind of like that plane analogy where before helping others and putting the mask on them, if the plane's going down, you work on yourself first, lead by example. And so if you want to create a trust for yourself to protect your personal assets, then be the grantor. Grant your soul to God irrevocably. And that way you're the grantor, you're also the trustee, so you continue to have full control over those assets. And, things will work out. God will protect you. So that's the first key point. And the second thing is, there's so many throughout the Matrix who I see virtue signaling about God-given rights. And that's even a slogan, in the Matrix. That, we all have God-given rights, under God. Okay, great. So if we all have God-given rights that we're born with, theoretically, and clearly if you really understand the system, we're born as a slave with our straw man. But even in this idea that we have rights inherently, and we're waking up to those rights, as we participate in the Matrix and as we go through these different challenges and trials and tribulations, and we start to realize how screwed up this place is and how unfair it is, and how in order to find protection, in order to realize God loves us, we have to take certain actions in order to do that. And this trust, and particularly the ecclesiastical trust where we seek protection under Jesus Christ, that's one of those key inflection points. And if you're watching this video, you're at that crossroads as well, because you could join this community and you could learn how to do it for yourself, or you could just stay out there and just kind of consume information and just, stay a slave in the Matrix. But, if you really believe, though, if you're one of those people who, through the research that you've done and through what you have, the willpower and the soul that you have, and, what you feel in your heart, if you believe you have God-given rights, then part of how you're going to identify what the correct path forward is in this regard is you have to be able to do it yourself. That's a very simple thing, but it's a fundamental thing which most people coming to this work don't understand, because we're all conditioned otherwise. We're all conditioned that we need lawyers, we need accountants. It's like, make sure you talk to your CPA, make sure you talk to your lawyer to get it written correctly, blah, blah, blah. It's all the Matrix programming. But if we really have God-given rights, then with the right knowledge that we could then implement, you could stand up for those rights yourself with no other intermediaries, including myself, okay? So if you're really looking for a method where you're trying to prove, not just to the world, but to God, you're trying to prove to God that, look, God, I have rights. How can I stand up for them? That's what this method is, because I've never seen another trust where you can legally and lawfully be both the grantor and the trustee. You can go and notarize the trust without any other parties involved, and now you've created a valid, lawful document that can protect your body and soul and all your other assets within the Matrix. That's a key point, because a lot of other private trust people, they're all use these layers and obfuscations, and they'll say, you need your neighbor, you need to do this non-grantor thing, you need to have multiple entities doing all kinds of things to work together. But really, the way that we teach things and the way we implement, and many people have proven this time and time again, is if you really have fundamental God-given rights, all you need to do is stand up and walk in those rights. And so we empower you with the right knowledge and information to go forward, and then you are the one who's going to take that information, and on your own 2 feet and on your own recognizance, you're going to act on that information. And all the other teachers out there, or so-called teachers, they don't teach that. They'll teach secrecy and don't use your name, because you want to obfuscate and make sure you have these other layers and make sure you do this non-grantor thing. But the ones who want to operate transparently, want to grant their souls to God, and want to do it themselves, you're not going to need me to do it for you. You're not going to need any other intermediaries to do it for you. And you want to learn that method where you yourself can stand on your own 2 feet and take control of those rights, then that's what this method is. So I look forward to seeing many of you on this path in our community, and for the rest of you, I wish you luck in servitude in the matrix.